Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 19th of December. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at 800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. You can always find more information online as well, weather.gov/Alaska/Fairbanks/Juneau or /Anchorage. And each one of those places will give you a map and show you if there's any areas that are highlighted. Those are areas that have warnings, watches, or advisories. Warning simply means watch out, or here comes the weather right now. A watch would simply mean get ready. We think there's going to be weather on the way. And an advisory is still a level of an alert, but maybe not as severe as a warning. In this case, we have a warning and an advisory for some northern parts of southeastern Alaska. A winter weather advisory up around the Haines area for accumulating snow as we go into the next 12 to 18 hours or so into tomorrow. Expecting that to continue there, about 4 to 8 inches of snow expected there for the highway areas up around Skagway and into the passes. We're expecting as much as 6 to 12 inches of snow. That would be a winter storm warning. So we do not have any warnings further south of that and nothing across the northern or western Gulf Coast right now. The cold and the usual snow that is coming is somewhat typical for this time of the year now for most of the interior, but one thing we want to point out as it affects the sea ice across the Chukchi Sea is the already persistent northerly flow that's working down through the Bering Strait and the Kotzebue Sound communities, but the additional push that's going to come behind another front dropping through the Chukchi Sea. This is looking at Tuesday and into Wednesday, a front that will be moving southward that will reinvigorate that northerly flow, pushing higher concentrations of ice to north-facing communities on the coastline there, places like Shishmaref and perhaps affecting areas along Point Hope there and some of the north-facing islands. Probably not Kotzebue, but as you get into Wainwright, some of those places there along the Chukchi coast may also be affected. So we'll check the ice map here in just a few minutes. Here's a look at the satellite picture now, and you can see a couple things have changed since we talked yesterday. We have a fairly decent low-pressure system across the southern Bering Sea. That has really filled in just in the last 24 hours there. Gone are the really gusty winds that we had on Friday and into Saturday. But now we have a frontal boundary shaping up. It's kind of curled around here across the western chain and is draped out across the central and western sections of the southern interior. You can see the clouds have been forming along that. We also had a new low pressure system kind of form up here on the inland areas of southwestern Alaska. And along that boundary we had a decent amount of snow develop across southwest Alaska and into south central Alaska. Many folks driving up and down the highways today in the road system probably saw some of that. Low pressure across the Gulf of Alaska is also pushing moisture closer to southeast. As such, we continue to see periods of rainfall there and snow, of course, across some of those places we were just talking about around Haines and Skagway and some of the highways nearby. As we look up north, you can see the northerly flow has developed. To look for the brighter white clouds, and this is where we're also seeing some snowfall and some slightly colder air dropping southward. As that continues to be invigorated by a new front dropping southward along in that flow, that higher concentration ice again may be on the move. So be very careful if you have plans that take you near sea ice up north or very close to it if you're out there in a boat or a ship. A lot of this will be on the move, and certainly any ice along the coastline right now will likely be unstable thanks to recent weather conditions there. As we look a little bit more out toward the west, you can see that conditions are drying up a little bit more across the central Bering Sea. It looks like we will be dealing with more active weather, though, as we get ahead into the midweek, and certainly one that provides for more of a cooler weather pattern. Here's today's weather map. Low pressure again across the central and eastern Gulf with pockets of rainfall along that. The surge today has been across the central and northern parts of southeast with that continued southerly flow riding up into the mountains there. It looks like it's going to be an efficient snowfall maker for many communities there. For South Central, pockets of snowfall will continue on and off throughout tonight and into southwestern Alaska, all associated with a 974 millibar low there. Front is forming across the central and eastern interior. That's moving eastward behind that colder northerly flow. And again, that's being found across areas north of the Bering Strait. A 965 millibar low there across the southern Bering Sea, bringing snow to places like the Pribilovs and areas eastward, as well as plenty of clouds out west. The stronger winds, though, again, have subsided. 975 millibar low by tonight. That'll continue working over Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Showers associated with that. We think there's enough lift in the atmosphere across the Gulf to see widely scattered, maybe even isolated showers and thunderstorms across the central and eastern Gulf. This will continue working its way eastward by tonight and into tomorrow, so areas along the outer coast of southeast have a chance for seeing isolated thunderstorm activity. Around the higher terrain, a few snow showers there that will continue across the areas in the Copper River Basin and into the Kenai Peninsula, as well as the Cook Inlet region. Southwest all the way into the interior could see light snow in southwest, and that'll taper off to snow showers the further north you go. The northerly winds will be channeled by a 982 millibar low just north of Point Barrow. This is allowing those winds to drop southward, and with that, of course, comes colder weather for many. And as the winds settle down, there'll be a better chance of seeing some more ice form once that happens. But until that, it might be a little more difficult for ice to grow until the winds, of course, subside. As we get into Tuesday, isolated thunderstorms remain possible across the eastern Gulf. Most places in southeast will still be dealing with rain. The exceptions will be areas in northern southeast around Haines and Skagway and the highways there. Watching for considerable snowfall as you get up into higher elevations around Skagway, as much as 6 to 12 inches there with that winter storm warning. Along the western Alaska Range and northward into the Kuskokwim Valley, snow showers are possible there. Low pressure drops out of the Bristol Bay region and east of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, a little bit closer to Sand Point by Tuesday afternoon at 981 millibars. And you can see a pretty good northerly wind coming right down the western coast. Low pressure is approaching the Chukchi Sea coast, and with that, snow and fog will likely be a little bit more likely as we get into the afternoon. Here's Wednesday now, and low pressure is still holding tight across the Gulf of Alaska, 986 millibars now. Periods of rain and snow will be found all the way along the coast. We're not really thinking as much of a chance for isolated thunderstorms at this point now for Wednesday, and it looks like it'll still be fairly wet, if not snowy and wet, across northern parts of southeast. Across the west coast, we do have a new little feature, though, that's showing up into the midweek, and that's a ridge of high pressure here, 1,008 millibars to about 1,000 millibars across the north coast. That will slow the progression of that cold, but it looks like it'll also clear up the sky, so areas of fog may be possible in the morning, and you might see a little bit of sunshine poking through the clouds from time to time in the afternoon. But it will break down eventually and allow more of that colder air to drop southward fairly quickly as we get toward the end of the week. And for anybody watching the weather across southern Alaska, while it has been fairly mild, considering recent weeks anyway, temperatures will be cooling down significantly as we get toward the end of the weekend into the weekend. So let's look at your general weather pattern across Alaska. For southeast today, temps are in the 30s and 40s. It was 43 in Sitka. Again, after a little bit of snow the other day, upper 30s around a good chunk of southeast, 37, in fact, a very popular number it appears, all the way from Juneau to Skagway, down toward Wrangell. Hyder, 37 degrees, lower 40s around Ketchikan, out toward Craig, 40 around Yakutat. It was 36 in Cordova, 30 in Valdez, mid-20s for Anchorage and Kenai, 34 for Homer, and 30 in Seward, 37 around Middleton Island. Up the Parks Highway, 25 degrees there, 6 below around Fairbanks. It was 17 above in Eagle and 11 below around Northway today. 8 below around Fort Yukon, up around the North Slope. Look for temperatures in the single digits there. Point Barrow is around, or Barrow Airport anyway, about 1 degree. 3 degrees for Kaktovik, 4 in Wainwright, low teens to as high as 23 degrees around Kotzebue Sound. Shishmaref, the big winner there today. 3 above in Nome, it was 27 in St. Lawrence Island around Savunga. Galena was a bitter 16 below. 7 around Grayling, 15 for Unalakleet, 3 in places up the coast there in the eastern Norton Sound region around Shaktoolik, 18 in Ammonok, 19 around Nunivak Island, and into Lake Iliamna. Temps were in the teens, 20s, even low 30s there. Most of Bristol Bay in the 20s and 30s today. The Alaska Peninsula in the 30s and low 40s around Sand Point, one of the warmer spots. Mid-30s for St. Paul and St. George. Unalaska and Dutch Harbor was 37, 39 in Adak, and it was 35 out in Shemya. Now, overnight low temperatures will likely stay anywhere from 5 to about 10 below for most of the interior locations, especially north of the Tanana Valley. As you get into the North Slope, it really won't be a whole lot colder. In fact, look for temps around 5 to 10 below there from Barrow out toward Kaktovik. 10 above for Nome, 20 in Savunga. Places like Bristol Bay in the 20s tonight. Looks like the Alaska Peninsula will be in the mid to upper 30s. St. Paul, 30 degrees, and lower 30s for the central and western chain, with southeast in the mid to upper 30s, south central, low to mid-teens, including Kenai at 18. High temperatures tomorrow should rebound into the lower 20s for many Prince William Sound temps, including Valdez and Whittier in the mid-20s. 30s and 40s for southeast. Kodiak, you're looking at 36. 41 around Cold Bay and False Pass. Southwest, expect highs in the mid-20s. 25 around Nunivak Island. 5 for McGrath. About 4 degrees in Fairbanks. 12 in Eagle. And high temperatures tomorrow for most of the northern interior. Sub-zero, but not by much. 0 in Fort Yukon. 1 below for AKwx Pass, and then the North Slope looking at temperatures that are mainly above 0, anywhere from 0 to about 10 to 15 above. Kotzebue Sound temperatures from about 10 to 20 and 16 around Nome, with St. Paul and Unalaska and Dutch Harbor in the mid to upper 30s. On to flying weather now. IFR conditions are expected to be in charge pretty much for the North Slope, as well as many along the Brooks Range summits and south toward the Yukon Valley. Southwestern Alaska probably looking at IFR conditions, as well as the Copper River Basin and many along the higher terrain for southeast, and hit and miss across the Aleutians in the morning. As we get to the afternoon, we'll see generally MVFR conditions across the west and IFR conditions across the North Slope, including many of your Brooks Range passes and the Chukchi Seacoast with the advance of that front. Look for IFR conditions around the Yukon Valley and the Middle Tanana Valley, the Copper River Basin, parts of the Kenai Peninsula, Bristol Bay, and the Aleutian Range, as well as continued problems around the higher terrain in southeastern Alaska. But let's check your pass conditions. AKwx Pass, we expect IFR conditions there. Same goes for Adigan Pass tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see some gradual improvements in the afternoon, but punching out through the west, you'll probably find lower visibilities and ceilings there across southwestern Alaska. Rainy Pass, MVFR through the pass region. Windy Pass, we expect to see more IFR and lowered visibility and ceilings there. Isabel Pass, instrument flight rule probably through most of the day. Mentasta Pass right now still looking okay at VFR. Tanita Pass, we expect that to lean over toward IFR conditions as the day goes on. Portage Pass probably holding around IFR through a good chunk of the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass, with periods of heavy snow in the region, IFR conditions seem to be a pretty good lock. Freezing levels right now, the surface freezing line really hasn't budged too much from most of the mainland. It's still trying to jog northward out across the central and northern Bering Sea. Otherwise, the 2,000-foot freezing line just offshore of the northern and eastern Gulf Coast and over southeast at times, and also across the eastern Aleutian Range. As we get into icing, mainly levels are going to be around 4 to about 5,000 feet across the northern and eastern Gulf. Some of that could reach into, this should be occasional widespread moderate, my apologies there. For light to isolated moderate around the Alaska Range and into parts of southwestern Alaska, about 4,000 feet and across the central and west. And once again, this is occasional to widespread moderate there, highlighted over southeastern Alaska. The jet stream, powerful wave of super fast moving air there is slowed a little bit across the North Pacific to about 125 knots. You can see some hitches and bumps now coming out of the Bering and across the northern Gulf, anywhere from 50 to about 55 knots. Low pressure sitting across the Chukchi Sea. Those wind speeds have slowed a little bit too, to about 40 to 50 knots coming in from the south and west though, and that's helping to drive the surface storm that will eventually allow that colder air to move its way southward down the west coast. At 9,000 feet, westerlies are moving across the Gulf right now, southerlies into southeastern Alaska from 40 to 55 knots, and west and northwesterly winds moving across the Chukchi Sea and the northern Bering about 15 to 25. Winds over the Aleutians ranging from 15 to 25 as well, generally northerly. And most winds across south central Alaska appear pretty similar, about 10 to 20 knots generally from the west to the east. At 3,000 feet, northerlies are working down the west coast right now, anywhere from 20 to about 30 knots. Winds are fairly light across the North Slope and the Kuskokwim Valley. Look for more of a southerly flow from the Kenai Peninsula northward, about 10 to as strong as 20 knots once they reach the Alaska Range. For southeast, southerlies continue at 40 to 55 knots, slightly stronger though as you get down toward the Dixon entrance. Across the Bering Sea, northerlies there about 10 to 20 knots, and winds are a little stronger for the central and western Aleutians. So as far as turbulence goes, expect areas to be a little bit of rough and tumble across the northern and eastern Gulf, below 4 to about 6,000 feet. Occasional widespread moderate is possible there. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Thank you to Alaska Public Media for allowing us to bring you Hangar Flying. We appreciate their support and we appreciate you joining us. We are pleased to have Gary Bennett back on the show today. He is going to be talking to us about ADSB and the installation process and what pilots need to do to get their $500 rebate from the FAA. Gary, welcome back.
Oh, thank you very much.
So we were just talking about installation, and you made a remark that pilots come back to you after they have it installed. And what do they say?
Basically, nobody has come back upset that they've installed it. Everybody's been real happy that they put the equipment in, and most of the feedback that I'm getting is especially with the ADSB in, is the fact that they're seeing traffic that they know they would not have otherwise seen without it. And knowing all along that that traffic's been there, you know, it's just extra looking over your shoulder.
I think that's great information.
Yes.
From people that have made that step to install. So we were going to talk about the installation process and what happens after that. So once an airplane has the new equipment installed, what steps does the pilot need to do to make sure he gets that check?
After the equipment is installed, basically you're going to take the aircraft on a validation flight. And what the validation flight consists of is flight for 30 minutes in what they call ADSB rule airspace, which in our case is basically flying in the Anchorage Class C for 30 minutes. They like you to fly, change your altitude, do some maneuvering within that airspace, and it's for 30 minutes, and it can't be for a second less, because we found that it's been proven that 29 minutes and 50 seconds was not good enough, and that they had to try again. And so basically that's it. It's a validation flight, and then you go back onto the website, let them know when you did the flight, and usually within 30 minutes or so they let you know whether or not the flight passed or failed.
And you mentioned it's pass-fail. It's not like a complex test where they say you pass these parts, but you have to retake this part. So people do fail. What are some common reasons that they fail?
The main reasons we've seen for failure, number one, is like I'd mentioned before, not flying a true 30 minutes or more in the rule airspace. And the second thing that we're finding is an issue is air-ground determination fault. And what usually causes the air-ground fault is taxiing too fast, you know. So what we found is that if you're taxiing a little bit too fast, the ADSB box reports that you're airborne, and FAA, knowing at that point that you're on the ground, you know, sees a fault. And, you know, it's a fraction of the percentage of the flight time, but it's enough to fail you.
Wow. So I've heard from folks that it takes about 4.5 to 5 weeks after that validation flight occurs and they pass before the FAA sends them a check in the mail. Does that sound about right, what you've been seeing and hearing?
Yep, that sounds about right. 4 to 5 weeks.
So is there any advice that you would have for pilots that might be on the fence about equipping and unsure about whether they should or they shouldn't, or if they should go with ADSB in and out?
My advice would be possibly to seek out and talk to people that already have the equipment. They seem to actually be the biggest proponent right now for the equipage, and rightfully so. You know, they're seeing the benefits for it right off the bat. They're seeing what this new style transponder does for them and how it helps out their awareness of the traffic, and also with the weather. You know, so you get a live feed basically when you're in range of the ground stations of the weather in your area, and that can be very useful information.
That's great advice to go out with somebody that's already got the equipment and kind of test it out.
Yes, absolutely.
A test fly. Do you have any advice or anything else that you'd like to add?
So the main things to keep track of, and that is, again, as far as getting your rebate and doing your validation flight, one of the things that, another thing that is causes an issue is the flight is done when you're recording it is in Zulu time. So in Alaska, if your validation flight is late in the afternoon, it's really tomorrow Zulu time, and you need to let them know because that the flight was actually the next day Zulu time, and then they can find your flight for you.
And if a pilot doesn't report that correctly the first time, they can resubmit with a corrected time, so they don't have to do the whole flight
They
over.
won't need to fly again, that's correct. The things that will make you fly again will actually be a failure of the test, and again, it's been fast taxiing and not flying enough in the rural airspace, and those will cause you to have to fly again. So the trick is to not spend $500 worth of gas to get your $500 rebate.
Good advice. Thank you so much for being with us and for giving us so much instruction on ADS-B. We really appreciate it.
Glad to, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you've enjoyed our conversations with Gary Bennett. He's been a great source of information. Until next time, fly safely.
Thanks, Mary. See you again later this week. Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and as we were talking about, the northerly winds setting in will change the way this looks over the next week or so. And we're concerned that some of the higher concentration ice with an extra northerly push might move closer to some north-facing communities like Shishmaref, perhaps Kotzebue, but more likely Point Hope up toward Wainwright, and many communities there along the Chukchi seacoast. So be mindful of what the ice is doing around your area, and be mindful as well that it may change as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday with a stronger northerly flow coming your way. Anytime you'd like to see more what the ice is doing, the forecast as well as the latest analysis from today, head to weather.gov/anchorage/ice, and you can read more about it on our Facebook page at facebook.com/NWS Alaska. There's a current analysis and more information there for your communities there in the Chukchi Sea area. Now, as we look back towards southeast, winds generally from the south as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. The strongest winds will be on Tuesday. Isolated thunderstorms are possible across the outer coast there and generally a little bit more offshore. 30 to as strong as 45 knots generally from the south again as we go through your Tuesday afternoon. And notice that seas are ranging from about 19 to as high as 25 feet. Across the inside, 35 knots with a 7 to as high as 10-foot sea. Most of those higher seas down south will be closer to the ocean entrances. For Wednesday, a little bit of a southwesterly shift. Winds diminish in all areas, 15 to 20 generally, and it looks like 3 to as high as 10 feet once again near the ocean entrances. And across the outer coast, 17 to as high as 23 feet as we get into Wednesday afternoon. For south central, considerably lower winds. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, a 3-foot sea there. Looks like broad easterlies moving across the region just outside of Resurrection Bay towards some of the glaciers, 15 knots with a 12-foot sea. Westerlies moving off Kodiak Island, 30 knots with a 16-foot sea. And northerlies moving down Cook Inlet, 10 to about 15 knots. Seas there 3 to about 5 feet with a variable flow inside of Shelikof Strait. Conditions are going to change a little bit more on Wednesday. A north and northwesterly flow kicks in, still looking at generally light winds across Prince William Sound and the northern Gulf, as well as most of Cook Inlet, 2 to 3 foot seas there. Northwesterlies move through the Barren Islands and Shelikof Strait, as well as Kodiak Island, and those winds pick up to about 25 to 35 knots, with seas as high as 10 to 14 feet outside the western Gulf and 5 to 8 feet from Shelikof Strait into areas just west of the Barrens. Now for Bristol Bay, look for a 25-knot wind. In sea ice-free waters, a 9-foot sea is possible with that northeasterly flow. Northwesterlies down the Bering Sea coast, 25 knots with an 11-foot sea, and west and southwesterlies for the Pacific coast, 25 to 30 with a 20-foot sea expected there on Tuesday. You'll see all areas jump into a northwesterly flow as we get into Wednesday, 8-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay, 10-foot seas down the coast, and 15 to 16-foot seas as you look at the Pacific coast there for Wednesday afternoon. For the Aleutians, this really looks a lot different than just a couple days ago when we were talking about storm and hurricane force winds. Not the case for Tuesday at all. North and northwesterly flow will continue for the central and eastern chain, 10 to 11-foot seas in the Bering Sea coast, 19 to about 20-foot seas there from Atka all the way out toward Unalaska, and 12 to 13-foot seas out in the west, 20 to 25, generally west and northwest. For Wednesday, you'll see the southwesterlies try and punch back in across the central and western chain there, and some of those westerlies will move from Atka to about Unalaska as well. 20 knots with an 11 to 13-foot sea for the Pacific coast, and 7 to 8-foot seas for the central and eastern chain, 9-foot seas out in the west for the midweek. At the west coast, there are those northerly winds, and heavy freezing spray will be a lot more likely across the northern Bering Sea because of this as we get into Tuesday. So watch yourself there. 7 to 9 foot seas expected for most of the open water there in the Bering as we go through your Tuesday. By Wednesday, a little bit of a shift there with the easterlies flowing across St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island waters, 4 to 6 foot seas. We'll keep the northerlies around the Kuskokwim Delta 30 knots going strong, making for 8 foot seas and 5 foot seas around the Pribilofs with a variable flow throughout the day. For the North Slope, southwesterlies for the Beaufort Seacoast over the ice, 10 knots and generally light, 15 to 20 down the Chukchi Seacoast, and northerlies just outside of Kotzebue Sound, 25 knots there also over the ice. By Wednesday, a little bit of a shift. Remember, that low pressure system's coming in, generally traveling eastward, so behind that, that should open the door for more of a northerly flow as we get later into the week. 20 to 25 there for the Chukchi Coast, and about 10 knots for the Beaufort Seacoast there on Wednesday. Let's recap your weather once again. The snowfall action tonight is going to be in northern parts of southeast around the White Pass region, expecting about 4 to 8 inches of snow. For the Haines area, especially west of the airport, you could see a solid 6 to 12 with a winter storm warning there, so watch for snow to accumulate tonight and into tomorrow for northern parts of southeast. Elsewhere, it's going to be rain. An isolated chance for showers and thunderstorms offshore of southeast as the low pressure system keeps things fairly active there. Passing snow showers still be possible across parts of south central Alaska and Bristol Bay. Up north, we're watching the return of northerly winds. It got a general north flow already, but with the next cold front, we'll probably reinvigorate some of those stronger northerly winds. And once again, the concern with that is that some high concentration ice may be pushed closer to north-facing communities there around the Chukchi Sea and inside of Kotzebue Sound. So be mindful of the sea ice changes that may affect your village in the coming days. Elsewhere for the interior, pockets of snow will be possible. High pressure tries to sit up here and break up some of the clouds across southwest. But cold air is coming, and it's on the move southward once again. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. I'll see you right here again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.